Good morning to everyone joining us from across the world and to our in-studio audience. Welcome to East Lansing, Michigan, and to EXPLOR Ed, hosted by Jerlando Jackson, me, Dean, the College of Education at Michigan State University. Today is our inaugural event in the new showcase series for the MSU College of Education. EXPLOR Ed will bring thought leaders to campus in conversation regarding the future of education, leadership, equity, and more. Before we start, I have a few reminders. We are in fact live, so please silence your phones and try not to move about the studio unless necessary. Also, when we get to the question and answer part of the program, there are 2 designated microphones for you to approach with your questions. Virtual attendees are encouraged to submit questions through the Q&A button. Today, our distinguished guest is Dr. James T. Minor. On March 1st of 2022, he assumed the role of the Chancellor of Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. Previously, he served as Assistant Vice Chancellor and Senior Strategist in the Office of the Chancellor at California State University, Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Office of Post-Secondary Education at the U.S. Department of Education during the Obama administration, Senior Program Officer and Director of Higher Education Programs for the Southern Education Foundation, and Associate Professor of Higher Education Policy at Michigan State University. Join me in welcoming Chancellor Minor back to East Lansing, Michigan.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Chancellor Minor, when we last saw each other at your alma mater, you had not been named Chancellor at the time. So congratulations in person.
Thank you. Thank you.
Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville is lucky to be the recipient of your academic leadership. We have a lengthy history together, but please share with the audience where you were born and about your educational background.
Well, good morning to everyone here and for those of you who are joining us online. Let me just begin by also saying congratulations to you, Dean Jackson. I think when we were last together, you had not been named dean of this college either, so congratulations to you. It's great to be back here in East Lansing. I grew up in Detroit, and for Detroiters, the natural second question is always East Side or West Side. So for those of you who are watching and wondering, I grew up on the East Side of Detroit, which was an interesting educational experience. I was in a room a few weeks ago, and somebody asked us to recall some of the most memorable educational moments in our lifetime, and one of mine was in the 3rd grade with Miss Beeman. So I'm a product of Detroit Public Schools, elementary, middle school, and high school, which I actually cherish.
Thank you. What about your educational experiences and upbringing in Michigan sparked your interest in attending a historically Black college and university?
Well, it's interesting. You have to remember, you have to flash back before the internet, before you can apply online, before students were making 15, 13 visits to different colleges and universities. In the college-going culture and infrastructure in an urban public high school, it just wasn't maybe what we all think it ought to be. My journey to an HBCU and Jackson State University was probably not how we design it. As a senior in high school, I was stopped by the athletic director in my high school. His name is Cecil Forbes. He's also a teacher in the high school. He asked me where I was going to college, and I shrugged my shoulders. And you have to think about this. This is senior year of high school. Hadn't applied, no plan really technically to go to college, although I had the ambition. Cecil Forbes stopped what he was doing long enough to call me into his office and said, I'm going to make sure that you get to college. It turns out that Cecil Forbes was an alumnus of Jackson State University. That was my path. And it happened that the university, Jackson State University at the time, had a pretty strong pipeline of students from Detroit, Michigan. And so it wasn't long after that encounter that I ended up in a van from Detroit, Michigan to Jackson, Mississippi at 17.
That's an amazing story that you share, because there's so many who, if it weren't for those moments where a person stopped and listened and inserted themselves in a very productive way in our lives, that the opportunities that seem to be apparent in retrospect would have never been made available for any of us. And so it's just amazing for how that journey has led you to where you are, and certainly with what I know about how you've given back, that's quite important. Maybe we'll get a chance to get back to opportunities like that, and our questions may come in that way as well. We first crossed paths during our undergraduate years. And you at Jackson State University, as you mentioned, and I at the University of Southern Mississippi. In what ways would you say the learning environment and culture of care at Jackson State prepared you for graduate school?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there are a few moments that I've had an opportunity to reflect on this. I think early on in my academic career, maybe I didn't realize the depth and breadth and the culture of that environment and what it meant. But here's looking back why I think it was important and how I would describe it. I found my intellectual self on that campus. And it was the first time, I think, in my educational journey that I had the opportunity to see myself as a scholar. And just think about that. And it was in a classroom that was affirming in ways that I don't believe always exist at other institutions. That I didn't find myself questioning whether I belonged there, number one. I didn't find myself questioning whether I was good enough to be there. The big question for me was, how good could I be, right? And that changed everything. And the only competition in a way was myself. And the first year I found myself on the dean's list, and that shaped my identity also. So for me, the two biggest elements were the sense of belonging and the affirming environment in terms of my intellectual self was just powerful.
Can I ask you to take a sidebar and maybe speak for one moment by having that experience, and others have had experiences similar as well, where they've experienced a culture of care from their institution, staff and faculty, knitted neatly together in a fabric of community. How has that shaped the places that you've led or would like to lead?
Yeah, that's a great question. Here's how I'd answer that question. I am convinced that leadership matters and the environment in which a student attempts college matters. And when I go to work every day, it doesn't matter the organization. I have a pretty strong sense of what we accomplish or what we fail to accomplish may matter for a young person. And whether that person completes their degree or departs. And so for me, I think that is how that culture, that environment shapes my approach to the work. Having been a part of other organizations, I've seen university environments where that quilt of care, as you described it, intellectually, co-curricular support out of the classroom matters for for a particular student, and it's clear to me that you take that same student and place her in a different environment and the outcome is not the same. So I have a pretty strong sense that what we do matters. And let me just extend this one step further. I've also learned over time that there are a lot of things that universities do, perhaps inadvertently, that leaves holes in that quilt. And the technical ability of administrators, of deans and deans across campuses and student affairs professionals to figure out what those are and to close them is really, I think, the challenge we find ourselves in today as we try to advance this degree completion agenda. I think the question is, how do we close those gaps that we know exist to support a greater percentage of students crossing the commencement stage?
Thank you. We're going to continue to walk through your career progressions, but thank you for taking that question, because I could talk about this, you can too, all day, and just the jewels of leaders who take these roles on with a full understanding that, and never forgetting that students are going to be the most important outcome from a college or university. What factors did you take into account when considering graduate school? What advice would you have for those in the listening audience thinking about graduate or professional school?
Well, I have to say, we don't have time for this, so I won't tell you the story, but there's a element of my professional journey that I have been very candid and transparent about, and that it's not a very traditional or scripted journey to college, as I just described, to a master's program, which I'll talk a little bit about, or through a doctoral program. None of it is happen the way that we would design it. So I mentioned earlier about finding my intellectual self at Jackson State. I ended up as a sociology major. My senior year at Jackson State, I had a professor by the name of Dr. Orville Cunningham, who said to me, I think you're smart enough to go to graduate school. And I went, okay, well, how do you do that? I come from a family where there's no precedent whatsoever of graduate school or advanced degrees, and I just had no roadmap or idea or reference point of how to do that. Orville Cunningham, who had a relationship with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, was the connector to that program. And by that time, there was no doubt in my mind that I was good enough to be there, that I was capable of pursuing and obtaining an advanced degree. But I hope what people will hear throughout our time here is the power of a single interaction. If there's one thing about my personal or professional journey, you hear me calling these individuals names as if they're in the room, right? Cecil Forbes, Orville Cunningham, Keith Parker, Tom Calhoun, the power of those interactions. And that, to me, made all the difference. So there I was at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, this kid from Detroit. I'd gone to Jackson, Mississippi, now to Lincoln, Nebraska, to find a mentor by the name of Melvin Williams, who was the connector to the doctoral program at the University of Wisconsin.
So we do have time for your stories, and I asked these
Are you
questions.
sure?
I think we do, and here's the reason why. The finished product is what often students and others who aspire, that's all they see.
Yeah.
And it looks really good on paper. The CVs are shining. The achievements and accolades are there. And we got to write it that way, right? But the realities is exactly this, right? That there's serendipity occurring. There's grace happening on these journeys. Yeah. And that when people extend themselves, their networks and opportunities, it can circumvent systems where first generation students may not end up doing X, Y, or Z, but in the right space, people, network, there's a lot possible. Yeah. And so we appreciate you sharing that, and I've got similar stories too. Our next place we crossed paths was at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Yeah. Wisconsin continues to gain national attention as a training ground for top CEOs. What did you learn about leadership in your time there through the graduate PhD program and your roles in senior leadership spaces?
Well, so I think there are three big lessons that I took away. So I tell this story about the connector to the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I don't want to lose the point about the journey, because you asked in the previous question sort of what advice I might give to students, and the best thing that I can give to them, I think, is not necessarily advice, but a level of candor about my own journey. And because it may look shiny, I think most of them are surprised to go, wow, that was the path to this or that. And I think it settles them in a way, because if their own journey is not perfectly scripted, it really is okay. So because I had lived in campus housing as an undergraduate, I get to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I've got zero furniture. The only thing I have are my clothes. So I leave the University of Nebraska-Lincoln over to the University of Wisconsin, and I talked about Melvin Jones. I'll share the story later in terms of the entry into that program, but I found a graduate assistantship in an administration, in the administration building, and I had a front row seat. If you talk about lessons of leadership, front row seat to how senior level leaders were managing a university. And there were three things that were happening at that time at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Some of you may remember the admissions booklet scandal. If you don't remember it, Google the University of Wisconsin admission booklet scandal. Just a fascinating front row seat to managing what at that time was a crisis. The other thing that was happening was there were issues in athletics, well before name, image, and likeness. And then the third is the relationship with the university, between the university and the community. So those were three big elements that were happening at that time And I was working directly for a vice chancellor and who gave me an all access pass to some of those closed door meetings, some of those planning meetings. And at that time, I could look around those conference room tables and distinguish who was up for that particular challenge and maybe who wasn't. And that was very telling. So I used to keep a little leadership notebook, things that I wanted to replicate, mimic, and things that I wanted to make sure that I was never the person around the table who appeared to be ill prepared for a moment in time. So that was critical to me. And I have to say, at that moment in time, I had no idea that I would be a senior level administrator at a college and university. This was really a level of problem solving, and at a level that I just hadn't seen prior to that time, which was paramount for me.
Thank you. So after completing your PhD, what was your first job? Who did you work with? And how did you professionally grow in this opportunity? And I think this is particularly relevant to the discussions around Journey.
Yeah, so rarely, Dean Jackson, do I have the time to reflect this way. So you're invoking memories. My first job was at the University of Southern California as a research associate and postdoc, and at the time was a Puglia Center for Higher Education Policy. And I happened to be working with the then famous Bill Tierney. And so for those higher ed scholars, it is impossible to complete a doctoral program without knowing the name Bill Tierney, William Tierney. And at the time, and still today in many respects, he was a giant in the field. And I had the opportunity to work with him. And I remember going on my first day, I go into work and, it's Bill Tierney, and I just completed this doctoral program. And I was in a full suit. And this is Southern California, it's a perfect 72 and sunny. And, I'm sitting in the waiting area waiting for him to come out of his office to retrieve me. He comes out, he looks at me and says, "Boy, you're overdressed." But that began the work relationship with Bill Tierney. The big lesson for me, for those of you who know him, he was a prolific scholar. He's since retired, so if I'm talking in the past tense, it's because he's retired. He's a prolific scholar. And the big lesson for me was productivity. That was a very difficult place to be if you were not productive. And the culture and the energy and the ethos of that place was productivity. And so the infrastructure and the machinery of what it meant to be a productive scholar, I think, is what I learned, in addition to prowess with respect to grant writing.
One thing that is and probably will always be true is that Bill tells it to you straight, and sometimes you need to hear it that way, particularly when you are taking journeys that can be very ambiguous. He'd never mince words, and I always appreciated his feedback, because if I needed to know how it should be, he would never mince his words. And so thank you for sharing that. So you are now at the point in your career stage that brought you to the College of Education at Michigan State University. You are coming off of this serious postdoctoral experience with this serious scholar.
Yes.
And now you land at one of the top higher education programs in the country, which happens to be in your home state.
Yeah.
Tell us about your experience.
I thought I hit the big time. I hit it big, and the kid from Detroit who probably would not have been accepted to Michigan State out of high school returns as a professor. Great place to work, great environment, great college, great program in my home state. I thought I hit the big time. I thought this was this was great. This was amazing. And quite honestly, I thought I would be here for 35 years. I thought I would retire as a full professor here at Michigan State. It's the other thing that I share with students or others now is that, plans don't always work out that way. But I thought it was a great place to be. I had a young family at the time, and it was a rich environment. I loved every second that I was here, being a part of this university community. Of course, if you were raised in the state of Michigan, people make you choose if you're a Spartan or not. I'll say it that way. And my family happened to be Spartan, so in every way, it was just a great place for me to be at that time.
Thanks for giving that insight. So we know how hard it is to obtain these tenure track opportunities, go through the ranks, and do all the publishing. At what point did you decide to explore your leadership passion yet again, and what went into your decision to go to Southern Education Foundation?
Well, it's a great question because as a product of a very traditional doctoral program and very conventional advice, even in the postdoc, is tenure sort of was the crown jewel. Tenure and promotion at a Research One institution in a place as good as Michigan State, like that was the goal. And I got two pieces of really good advice along the way. One piece of advice was that you're good enough to work anywhere. And that piece of advice was given to me by Gloria Ladson Billings, who allowed me to privilege myself as much as the place, if that makes sense. And it was at that time that I had begun to do that. And I had relationships beyond the university, obviously, as a result of my work. And as an assistant professor at that time, a grant portfolio was a good thing to have. I was working with the Southern Education Foundation that had a grant portfolio of roughly $5 million and no director. And the opportunity was presented to me, and I was interested. I went to the dean at the time. This may have played out differently if you were in the seat. The dean at the time was Carol Ames. And remember, I thought I would retire from Michigan State. And I said to the dean, this is a really exciting opportunity. I really like to do it, and I'll be back. And at the time, Dean Jackson, I think sabbatical here at Michigan State was probably one semester at the time, and I needed to be away for a little longer than that. And that is what forced the decision. And because of the advice that was given to me, I don't want to attribute my decision to that advice, but it made it okay to pursue something else. And I thought, if it's in the cards for me to come back, I will, and if not, then I'll continue on. But it was a major inflection point because so much of my professional identity was in the idea of being a faculty member at a place like Michigan State.
I appreciate the way you thought through that and shared it, because there are very critical and difficult points in one's life where you have to actually bet on yourself.
Right.
And what you are describing is a person who, committed to betting on themselves and ensuring that the outcomes were going to align with your overall career interest. And that's not easy to do, to bet on yourself when you have a infrastructure, whether it's an institutional infrastructure or corporate infrastructure that you fit into, and there's some lockstep opportunities. And once you've made it, and you just kind of, progressively move through the rest of your life and career. But those bends and turns and curves that takes you into that very inciting areas of one's potential life, if you don't have the courage sometimes to do it, it's you never get there. So thank you for bringing that out in your answer and response. So I know the audience is tapping their feet in some ways, virtually and in person, and they're tapping their feet because I know I took a long time to get here. Tell us about your experiences working in the White House for President Obama.
Yeah, it makes me smile, and let me maybe tell you why. So I've shared a little bit about my personal journey, and if I thought making it to the big time was being an assistant professor here at Michigan State, getting that call was a true highlight of my career. And I'm sitting working on a project and my phone rings, and the person, after I pick up, shares his name and says, "I'm Sam." The guy's name was Sam. And I'm calling from the White House. Excuse me, right? It was just a surreal opportunity. But the thing that I share with students is you get that call because of your track record and because of the professional accomplishments that you have been able to realize. And I don't mean that in a box checking way. I think what people saw were accomplishments and commitment. And those two, I think, have to go together. So I get this call. I can't believe, I'm looking at the phone saying, is this real? And that was the big opportunity. And I hung up the phone from that call. I walked down the hallway to the president of Southern Education Foundation, Kent McGuire at the time. And I said, you won't believe what just happened. And I started to talk to him about it, and he says, you've got to go do that. And so it was great to have his support to make that transition. So fast forward, I'm now in Washington, D.C., and the thing that I share about the opportunity to work in the Obama administration, I have argued that since the Lyndon Johnson administration, this was a moment in time where higher education was an agenda item for the administration. It was one of the first times that we began to hear free college. One of the first seasons where we began to take on student debt. And what was fascinating for me is that you had an opportunity to move the country in a particular direction. And so this wasn't about keeping the trains moving in a large bureaucracy. This was, can you shape, create, change the trajectory, change the odds for millions of students across the country in terms of their ability to earn an affordable, high-quality degree. Last piece I'll share about working in the administration, and this is not a political point. I think I want to be clear about that. It doesn't matter which side of the political aisle. We probably, if you're a part of this conversation, could agree that going to college is a good thing, graduating from college is a good thing. And so I don't mean to make the experience political. But to have the senior most government officials interested in college access, college completion, and affordability, it was just a phenomenal experience.
Thanks for giving us a peek
Yeah.
and to the experiences that you had.
Yeah,
there.
I have to say my grandmother during that time told everybody that I was having dinner in the White House with the Obamas on Sunday, which was not true, but I never told her that. I didn't take that away from her. So it was one of the best parts of having that opportunity. She would always say, tell that Michelle I said hi. I went, all right, Grandma, I'll be sure.
And the good news is they have license
Yeah.
to do that.
Absolutely.
I had several knee clinics that was going to be popping up in Georgia to help fix knees when I got my PhD.
There
So,
you go.
They tell the
There you
story
go.
how they do. But the exciting part about it is whether they have a nuanced understanding about these journeys, they're proud.
Yeah.
Right? They're very proud.
Absolutely.
And these are their victories. So that brings us to here. Now that you've made it into the Chancellor's office, what reflective lessons do you have to share for those who aspire to be a college president also?
Wow. This is, I want to be careful here because I think, as we're talking about the education journey, I don't know that I necessarily aspire to be a university president or chancellor. It was not on my list early in my career. I think it's important to realize that other people saw it before I did, which really sort of got my attention and made it even a consideration. But here are a couple of things that I would share with people who are considering it. Number one, and I think most importantly, is to test the motivation for the interest in serving as a university president or chancellor. I think a lot of people like the idea of the title. Some people have an idea of what the role is, which may be a couple standard deviations away from the reality. But I find that when I talk to early career professionals who have aspirations to be a college or university president, the biggest distinction to me is some are very clear about why, and others see it as a position, right? And when I go to work every day, I have a tremendous sense of responsibility for the lives of young people served by this institution. And it's serious. I mean, what we do as a university matters for the life and family of individuals. So sometimes when I talk to young people about the role, I'm testing their motivation. Is this really a sense of duty and service, or is this about the title? And if it's the latter, I just invite them to inspect that a little bit. So that's number one. Number two, just quickly, I would say motivation's number one. The other is sort of the technical skill and ability to actually perform well in the role. And so as a faculty member, you're trained to know a lot about a very narrow set of topics. And of course, along the career, you find yourself having to know a lot about a lot of things. And so I think the appetite and the interest in knowing as much as you can about as much as you can is really important for university leaders. And then, number three, I think there are some leadership characteristics that must be demonstrated. Let me rephrase. There's some leadership and character, right, elements that need to be demonstrated prior to assuming the role if you're going to be successful, I think, in the role.
Thank you for those insights. We're going to open up question and answers to our in-studio audience and our virtual audience. And as we get ourselves prepared for the virtual questions, we will kick to an in-audience question first.
If someone move into the microphone.
Good morning. Thank you so much for sharing all that you've shared today. So MSU has a new strategic plan, and the MSU College of Education is in active planning for its own strategic plan. Dr. Miner, I'm hoping that you can share a little bit about SIUE and its mission, its goals, or a little bit more about the community that you're leading there.
Yeah, well, thank you. We're also in the process of launching a strategic plan that will be presented to the board later this month. So for those of you who don't know SIUE, Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, it is a wonderful metropolitan university located in Edwardsville, Illinois, which is just 20 minutes outside of St. Louis. So sometimes when we say Illinois, people think Chicago. I say think St. Louis. But it's roughly 13,000 students. The university has 3 campuses, if you will. Edwardsville is where the majority of our academic programs are located. There's a higher education center in East St. Louis and a school of dental medicine in Alton. But what I think is wonderful about SIUE and institutions like it, I honestly believe that institutions like SIUE represent the most consequential sector of higher education today. That as a country, if we're going to realize the degree completion gains that we have all agreed that we need to realize, I think it will happen at regional publics across the country like SIUE. And I think, the students that we enroll, getting them across the finish line, giving them an opportunity to earn a college degree, I think is where the gains will be made in this country. So there are a couple of things that we are planning to do. I can't give away our strategic plan before we make the presentation to the board, but I can say that there are 3 big things that we're going to pay attention to. One, obviously, is degree completion and student retention. And may I just take 30 seconds on this, because I think it's a message to all of us in higher education. I think our collective ability to get a greater percentage of students who are from low-income households, who may be the first in their family to ever set foot on a college campus, represents the challenge of our lifetimes. And so for me, the challenge is sort of technically, how do we do a much better job at figuring out not only how to enroll those students, but to get them through a degree program and across the commencement stage. So degree completion and retention is a big part of our plan. The other has to do with the brand identity of the university, alumni engagement, and community impact, I think, are the 3 or 4 things that we will really try to focus on in our strategic plan. As strategic plans go, maybe the reference point is a 50-page document that goes on the shelf for several years. That is not what I think we envision, and I don't think that's what reflects a contemporary strategic plan. I have referred to it as a strategic action plan, but I think it will be concise, but I think my hope is that it also focuses people on a very discrete set of goals that we can pursue together as a university community.
All right, thank you. Let me pose our first question here. Chancellor Miner, your journey to the chancellorship is inspirational. I'd be curious to hear how you manage the complex racial dynamics of being a Black male leading a predominantly white campus.
Yeah. So somebody is asking a very real question online. So thank you for the question. Let me take people back to the interview process at SIUE in the Chancellor search. It was a room much like this, filled with people, and there was a question similar to the one that was just asked. And the person started the question by making a declaration. You're a Black man, and you're here in Edwardsville, Illinois, and this is a white institution, and there had been, during that time, incidents on campus that were racially charged. So the temperature happened to be pretty high at the time, and it was on the top of minds in this university community. And I think in a moment of candor and honesty, I just said to that person, I've embraced who I am as an African American man in America. I'm clear about what that journey has meant, and I'm clear about what that will mean by different groups of individuals in this university community. It's one of the things, Dean Jackson, that I think we're no longer allowed to set aside and to behave as if it doesn't matter. And so I've sort of embraced it and saying, listen, I'm a Black man. There's no denying that, with a Black American experience. And I think that has value. But I think the job is to, if you're serving in the role as chancellor, that can't be the dominant feature. My job is to lead a university community as authentically and as professionally as I possibly can. And I think we all do that uniquely, and I intend to do it uniquely as a Black man.
All right, thank you. I'll take one more from the virtual audience, and then we'll pivot to some questions in studio. Let's see, insightful. Thank you very much. Can you share some thoughts about what universities should do to engender the sense of duty and service in the age of so much polarization and at times despair? I really like the power of a single interaction and wonder about how, as a faculty, I could be how as a faculty member I can make my one single interaction profound.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great comment on the state of affairs in lots of university communities today. Maybe we could argue in our society today. Together with a really good question about the importance or the power of one interaction. So let me start with that question. I think all interactions matter. The interesting thing to me is that none of us know which interaction will matter for the individual you're sitting across from, you're standing across from. Sometimes, Brian, students come up to me years later and say, Dr. Minor, do you remember that time, the 6 week of class in the fall, and I won't remember that moment. But whatever happened for that student was particularly powerful. The other example I give, I was walking downtown Lincoln, Nebraska, the week of commencement. I'm walking out of a restaurant. A student stops me on the sidewalk with his family, introduces me to his family, and says to them, I would not have graduated if it were not for this professor. So the faculty member who's asking that question, I want you to hear this. And I thought I was just doing my job in teaching the class. So to me, based on my own personal journey and what I understand about how critically important these interactions might be for individuals along their educational journey, I think all of them matter. Now, on the issue of polarization, one of the things that I think is really beautiful about university communities is our commitment, right, to be the sort of place of free exchange of ideas and to be able to test them in a way that advances our society. So my question, or my response to that question, is to invite individuals inside of university communities and university communities to lean into these conversations, these debates in the most responsible way. If that doesn't happen on university campuses, we can't expect that it will happen in our society. You have to think about these generations of students who will move from our campuses, right, into communities, into workplaces. And I think colleges and universities are sort of the safe place for them to practice exchanging complex ideas and debating particular points about the future of our society.
Right. We'll take some in-studio questions.
Hello, hey. Thank you, Dean Jackson, for hosting this, and thank you, Chancellor Minor, for being here. I'm also a graduate of Jackson State University, class of 2017. So it is, I actually knew about you before, way back when I was researching with Dr. Ori, Byron Ori, and he was telling me about some of the things you were doing. But a question that's kind of tangential to what was asked before. I'm interested to know, how does being a product of an HBCU, how does that lens inform your practice being Chancellor of a PWI?
Well, it's a great question. I think you referenced the comment early about the culture of care, the sense of belongingness, and the affirmation. I think if you ask me, 3 elements of that environment that matter most would be those 3. And so the question is, I think the challenge is, how do you create that for a more diverse population of students? All right, we have international students, we have graduate programs, graduate and professional programs, School of Dental Medicine, engineering, and students who are from Chicago, right? South side of Chicago, students who are from St. Louis, and students who grew up on the farm. And so I think that the challenge is, how do you create that sense of belongingness and that sense of empowerment and affirmation for a much more diverse group of students. And I think there's a way to do it. The culture of the university has to support that. And that is a matter of sort of technically and programmatically doing things that support that, and being very attentive to a campus culture that supports that. I'll give you just one example, and for those my SIUE family that's tuned in today, know that just yesterday, day before, we sent out a message about anti-trans stickers that are appearing in some of our restrooms across campus. And it's something, again, as university leaders, we have to lean into, that our campus has to be a safe place for those individuals also. It has to be affirming for those individuals also. And so I think universities give us opportunities, right, to state and reaffirm our values. And I think as a leader, I certainly have the responsibility to do that.
All right, I have another question virtually here. Can you discuss how you advocate on behalf of your institution to legislators and alumni to bring awareness of your strategic plan goals? Also, how can administrators and students take on some of these advocacy roles? And this is from Dr. Charles Jackson III,
Yes.
former student in your MSU graduate course, so he wants you to remember him.
Yeah, well, thank you, Dr. Jackson. And I'm very proud and pleased to refer to Charles as Dr. Jackson. I certainly remember him participating in my class when I was here at Michigan State. It's amazing how the relationships endure over time is really beautiful. So let me just answer the question quickly on legislative advocacy. It is a part of the job for any university leader. To me, I think there are 2 key elements. One is understanding the value proposition of the institution and being able to articulate it in a very compelling way to a legislator. I had a lesson when I was at the California State University system. I go up to Sacramento, which is the state capital, to advocate on behalf of the university. And you're in the waiting area waiting for a member, and the door opens, out walks someone from transportation. I go in, I have a conversation, I walk out, the person waiting is from representing healthcare. And so the mind of a legislator there's a need to be very concise and very clear and very compelling about the value proposition of the university and the ability to connect the university to other things that matter for the particular state or for that particular member. And some universities are more skilled at doing that than others, but I think that's what really matters for connecting with the legislative community.
Okay, we have time for one more question. I'm not seeing any virtually. And if we have one in the in-studio audience that would love to get their question in, this would be a good opportunity.
Thank you for coming, Dr. Miner.
Thank you.
You have talked extensively about community and mentors and happenstance and also not having a roadmap. As somebody who also didn't have a roadmap, but had the right people at the right time stick their neck out for me, I was curious what, going through that process, you don't realize that's what's happening when it's happening. When did that reveal itself to you that like these are the people that made a difference in my life back then?
I knew it was happening when it was happening. And mainly because I knew, but for that individual, I would not even be in a position to take advantage of an opportunity. That's how explicit it was. I mean, people were helping and offering advice. It wasn't in passing. I mean, this was, here's what I need you to do first, second, and third if you want to continue in this way. And so, again, the reason why I will forever call the names of those individuals is because I was very clear that they were providing a level of wisdom, guidance, and advice that I would not have had or it would not have been available to me otherwise. So we don't have time, but I just one story. Melvin Jones, the late Melvin Jones, who was the CFO at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, was a mentor of mine, dear mentor of mine. And he is the individual who convinced me that I needed to continue to pursue a doctoral degree. I got a master's degree farther than anyone in my family. I thought this is great. But I didn't have the pedigree, if you will, Dr. Jackson, to pursue the PhD. And I just want to be clear with people about this. When he said to me, here's what you need to do first, second, and third, a part of that advice was you need to go knock on the door of the dean. I went back home to Detroit, Michigan. I had a '88 Ford Mustang hatchback at the time, Dr. Jackson. Drove from Detroit to Ann Arbor was my first stop, don't boo. And knocked on the door of the dean and said, I'm James Miner. I'm going to solve all the problems in higher education, but I need a PhD in order to do it. He said to me, this is great, but I think the program at Wisconsin would be better suited for you. I went back home to Detroit. I unpacked and repacked my car, drove to Madison, Wisconsin. No appointment, no arrangements. I found my way to the school. I knocked on the door, and the dean happened to be out of town. So did you have an appointment? Was he expecting you? Dean Charles Reed. Right? And she said, Dean Reed is out of the country, but the associate dean, Michael Sakuviak, might talk to you. I mean, just think about this. And Dr. Melvin Jones was on the phone with me the entire way, walking me through that sequence. Did you ask him this? Did you talk to him about this? Did you get that? And so there was no doubt in my mind that I had a coach on my shoulder, right? Helping me throughout that process. And I think but for that, I'm not in that doctoral program at the University of Wisconsin.
This has been an amazing show. Chancellor Miner, thank you for coming back and spending time with us in the College of Education at Michigan State University.
My pleasure. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. As we conclude our time today, I wanted to touch on our location, Michigan State University. Campus is alive today with students and a football game set later today, particularly tonight. The positive, exciting energy here is palpable. It feels like a place you'd want to be, and you should. I'll close today by sharing this video about what makes our college and our university so special.
This is where it starts. This is where your perspective will change, where you will push boundaries, open new doors, and make discoveries. This is where you will improve the world of today and tomorrow by fighting for equity, inclusion, and justice. This is where you will ask and answer questions impacting health, well-being, and education for all. This is where research meets practice, where you have come to learn and will leave prepared to lead. This is the place. Our campus. Your college. Welcome home.